Hello, everyone. So, because we are celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month and because there isn't often enough of a focus on the mental health of the AAPI community, and goodness knows if ever we needed to talk about it, it's now, considering the recent events of the past year. And so I wanted to talk to my favorite South Asian in America. Sorry, Mindy Kaling, but it is the Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy. Hello, how are you?
I'm doing well, Jameela. It's so good to see you again.
Yeah, thanks for coming all casual, making me feel like I showed up. The hell, this feels like it feels like the end of the world movie, and you're about to tell me that the world is ending, a tidal wave is coming. You look so official, so handsome. I love it. Do you have
Well,
a
thank you
hat?
so much. Thank you. I have my cover right here. This is what
Oh,
I
for God's
wear when I
sake.
go outdoors. Yes, that's right.
Can you put it on for me? Can I see it?
Well, so I put it on it. This is how it looks. So that's what
It's
I'm
extremely
wearing.
exciting. Now I last saw you. We got to see each other in person. Do you remember hanging out with people in person? That
It feels like
was
a distant memory, but
I
uh, but
know.
I'll tell you this, Jameela, you were one of the last people that I actually hung out with because that was a trip. I think that was probably one of the last work trips I made in New York when we met up and had our wonderful conversation, which by the way had me in stitches for half of it. So I laughed so much.
You were on my podcast. You were, I think, the second person on my podcast. I'd never done one before, and it was such an honor to have you on. And we talked about loneliness because you had a book about loneliness coming out at that time. And I think that we didn't really know much about COVID-19 yet. It was just starting to emerge all over the world, and we were just sitting there face to face, just spitting near each other, having no idea what we were saying. And it was such a joy to meet you, and you're such a warm and personable person, and I think that that's something that one wouldn't expect from someone who has been in such an elite and top and responsible position within government so many times. I mean, the last time I saw you, you were no longer the Surgeon General as you had been under Obama, and now under Biden, you're back.
I
How are
am. I
you? How have
am.
you been for the past year?
I've been well. Thanks for asking. It's been a tumultuous year, and like many people, I didn't expect to be living the year over those past 12 months that I did. But what happened to us is, in March we were visiting my grandmother in Miami. She had just fractured her hip, and she was, in rehab recovering, and everything was starting to close down at this time. It was in early March, and so we had come down with enough clothing for 3 days, and with our two small kids, my wife and I, and we just decided to stay. And it was one of those just in the moment decisions. And more than a year later, we're still here. And one of the things that's made me realize is that I actually don't need that many clothes. So that's like, one interesting thing. But
Can I just ask, please tell me that you just wore that outfit. That's all you wore for the whole year of the pandemic while we were all in sweats or just t-shirts and no bottoms like Winnie the Pooh. I love the idea that that's all you had with you.
That is funny. Well, I wasn't Surgeon General again at that point. So I was more
Fair.
wearing scrubs and shorts, everywhere I went, which was basically around my house. But I'll tell you that one of the most powerful parts of the year, as challenging as it was, not seeing friends and not being able to travel and do the work that I did before, was being with family, being with my parents and my sister. Look, I left home when I was 16 years old, to go off, after high school, and I haven't lived at home for a long period of time since then. But it was really extraordinary. We were a lot of people under one roof. It was 4 generations under one roof. My grandmother, my parents, my wife and I, our 2 small kids, 2 cats, my sister often. And, it was a full house. And, sometimes we'd get on top of each other and it was chaotic. But I'll tell you, it was also just incredibly gratifying because, as close as I am with my parents, and I talk to them every day and I call my sister every day too, but there's just things you miss when you're not there in person. Like I realized, for example, that my dad had a rotator cuff problem and he was having trouble lifting his arm to do things. And he never would have said anything to me because he doesn't really talk about, any health complaints. He doesn't like to complain.
Hmm.
But when I realized that, I was like, we got to get in there and help him and do something to support him. you just learn so much when you're together. And lastly, I'll just say seeing my kids like wake up in the mornings and just run over and jump into bed with their grandparents, and just seeing the joy it brings to my parents as well. It's just reminded me that I think this is sort of how we're meant to live, just together as people, and I realize that in my own life, as much as I have realized how important people are, there has been a gap between, my stated values and my lived values. I've wanted to center my life around people, but I've really centered my life around work for much of my life. And I want that to be different going forward, in part because I want my kids to see a way of living that is truly people-centered.
Yeah, it's a good thing you didn't go and get a job again as the Surgeon General of the United States during a pandemic. Yeah,
that's created a wrinkle.
Well done on a new relaxing lifestyle. No, I think that's true of quite a lot of people. I think quite a lot of people have reevaluated their lifestyles and recognized that perhaps the pace of life in which America even has been moving since the 2008 recession. That's really when I think a lot of people kind of jumped onto one of the more hardcore periods of treadmill when it came to they're trying to kind of like rebuild the economy, rebuild their own lives economically, everyone just working themselves to death in order to acquire the right apartment, the right car, the right bag, etc. Capitalism took quite a strong hold over America, and I think that a lot of people have realized that maybe I don't need to live in this incredibly expensive area. Maybe I can move out to the suburbs. Maybe I need to spend more time with family. I definitely think that we've all registered that we need people more than we thought we did. And the irony of the fact that at the beginning of the pandemic, you were bringing out a book about loneliness, just as the world was about to experience one of the loneliest periods of any of our generation. Not for you, because you were just crawling with family, but everyone else. Was there anything particularly, but especially South Asian about your experience last year, would you say?
Well, so my family, as you know, is originally from India, and I grew up with a very sort of strong cultural element to my upbringing, which meant like we ate Indian food at home. Like, if you come to our house, it looks very Indian in terms of like the things we have on the walls and, the clothes that we wear. But there are other distinct elements of being South Asian, which you'll find in our house. And some people might find this unexpected, but one of them is that we have multiple fridges. And this is not a surprise at all to people who are South Asian. It's expected you don't just have one fridge. So we have three full-size fridges that are filled with like Indian food that we're making a big trip to the Indian store, get a whole bunch of stuff, pack it in the freezer. And there it is. Our fridge also, I should tell you, if you were to look inside our fridge, what you would find? You would find a lot of yogurt containers. And it's not because we are stockpiling yogurt, because the world may be ending. It's because a lot of Indian families, including mine, over the years, like just used to keep yogurt containers and store other food in them, like rice.
We love Tupperware. We love Tupperware. It's a thing. I think we single-handedly are the nation that keep the Tupperware business going.
That is right. Tupperware.
We're very resourceful with it.
And you know what else we love? And I'm going to show it to you right now is Corelle, right? So you see this cup right here? It's Corelle. Like every Indian family that came over in the 70s and 80s has like plates and cups, that are Corelle-ware. So
my whole family does. I don't have any with me because I'm not in my current house, but I am drinking a turmeric and ginger chai tea, which is the most Indian, one of the more Indian hot drinks you can have. There's turmeric in everything. I can't wear white anymore. Everything's just gone yellow. It's a nightmare. And so would you say that that's had an impact on your mental health, being able to live so surrounded by family, a positive impact rather on your mental health, to be able to be so enveloped in multi-generations? Because as you said, that, this is how people should live. It's how people once did live. And especially within our culture, it isn't normal for us to leave the nest and move off into our own house, separate from our elder relatives and from our extended family. This is how we were raised. And so I think it's amazing that at this stage in your life, you're now being able to revisit that. And you're not only are you able to witness your parents, but your parents are able to witness you. Not when you're on a television standing next to the president of the United States. Like, they get to actually be with you. And I think that's great.
They do, which has been wonderful. I mean, one of the things that I learned in part through difficulties in my own life, but also by studying the subject of loneliness after I was Surgeon General, was that social connections, healthy social relationships, are a buffer to stress. And they actually help They help us deal with adversity, and they have real impacts on our physical and mental health. So we know, for example, that when people struggle with loneliness, that it increases their risk for anxiety and depression, but it also increases their risk for heart disease, premature death, for dementia, and for other physical illness. And over the last year, I would say, for me, even though there were real challenges that I was dealing with at various times on the work front, being able to be here with my family was that buffer for me. And I feel very lucky, and I don't take it for granted, because I know there are many people who went through this pandemic alone. There are others who were not able to see their grandparents and their parents because they were worried about getting them sick, and they couldn't quarantine themselves because they were an essential worker, maybe in a hospital or in a grocery store, and so they were exposed and they didn't want to expose their parents. So this has been a hard year on many fronts, but one of the blessings I do feel like I've had is a chance to be around people that I love, and especially after this experience, I certainly don't take that for granted.
Can I ask how, in particular, loneliness does impact the physical health of people? Because I can't imagine a year of so much loneliness where some people had to isolate on their own and they stayed in lockdown completely in solitary confinement. And then they're also having to fend off a very serious virus in a pandemic. How does loneliness impact your physical health?
Well, loneliness is a stress state. And in the short term, stress states can be helpful. So if you're taking an exam the next day and you're feeling, worried and anxious, and your body generates a stress state, that may actually enable you to focus more. It may keep you awake. It may enable you to really get your attention on the problem at hand.
Is that because of adrenaline?
Yeah, it's a series of stress hormones, in your body that course through your system and prepare your body to essentially to fight, fight if there's a predator, fight if there's a problem, but really focus and marshal your full physical capabilities and your mental capabilities. The challenge, though, Jameela, is when stress is chronic, right? So in the short term, it can be helpful, but when it's chronic, when it lasts for a long period of time, then those hormones that are flowing through your system, that cortisol in your system, that actually over time has a negative effect on your body. It creates added inflammation in your body, and actually has a destructive impact on your tissues and blood vessels, and can increase the risk of chronic illness, including heart disease. And so that stress response, the more we learn about stress and the more of its connection to inflammation, we realize that this is actually an underpinning of so much in the way of disease processes and contributes to a host of illness. And so one of the things that we have to do is to think about how to move out of that chronic stress state. And it turns out one of the most powerful ways we can do that is by surrounding ourselves with healthy social connections, like in our life. Those could be family, they could be friends. It doesn't mean that you have to be living, with everybody that you care about. You could be seeing people regularly, talking to them regularly, but having their presence in your life is extraordinarily important. It's worth noting also that relationships aren't the only thing that diminish your stress and break that chronic stress state. For some people, exercise can be really helpful in doing that. For other people, meditation can be helpful. For others, music. For others, being in nature for a period of time can be extraordinarily helpful. But however we find it, we've got to find ways to break out of that chronic stress state. And the truth is, Jameela, that the world that we're in right now, modern society, and it's not just the United States, this is true in modern sort of cultures around the world, it sort of generates that stress because the modern world tells us three lies, which are extraordinarily destructive. It tells us, number one, that your self-worth is dependent on how much money you have. Number two, it tells us that our self-worth is dependent on how much power we have. And number three, it tells us that our self-worth is dependent on how famous we are, right? And so those three lies, as it turns out, are ones that push us to chase goals that aren't entirely our own, and they don't lead to fulfillment. And you and I both know plenty of people who are rich, powerful, and famous, and profoundly unhappy, and chronically stressed, and struggling with their mental health. And so this is what we have to push back against. And I do think the way we were designed, Jameela, as human beings, is to be social creatures. That doesn't mean we're all extroverts, by the way. I'm an introvert. I know many other people out there are introverts as well. Same with you. Yeah, I remember from last time. But the truth is, we all need people to some degree in our life. And so we have to build our lives around people. And that, Jameela, is a question I find myself thinking about most coming out of this pandemic, which is, what do we want to build our life around? Do I want to build my life once again around work and the pursuit of quote unquote success, based on how modern society defines it? Or do I want to build my life around what I know is deeply fulfilling, which are people and relationships?
I also want to just add, though, not not to directly contradict you, but also there are some times where you might be living with someone who also triggers your stress responses and can also make you feel quite ill. So also there are
Absolutely.
times where it is better to be on your own. Generally, you should seek out people who don't trigger you or impact your mental health negatively. But I also don't want someone to hear this and think, I should just be around anyone in order to not risk my health. It has to be people who are actually good for your sense of self-esteem and your sanity. Just
I'm
a
so
caveat
glad.
with that.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because some of the people I talked to over the years who are the most unhappy were people who were surrounded by many, many people. They lived with
Mm-hmm.
others, they went to work with many people, they lived in densely populated neighborhoods. But you're absolutely right that what matters is the quality of your relationships. They have to be healthy relationships. And what marks a healthy relationship is one where you can, number one, show up as yourself, where you can be who you are authentically and not have to put on airs or try to be somebody else. A healthy relationship is also one where you are supported by another person, and where you also can be there and support them. But the key, but it's what was surprising to me is just, and striking, was just how many people have people in their life who they feel they should feel close to, but they don't have necessarily a healthy relationship with, but they maybe stay with them out of obligation. Meanwhile, it can take a toll on their mental health, because healthy relationships extraordinarily powerful for reducing stress. Unhealthy relationships can be a source of stress, and that can
Mm-hmm.
really be harmful.
I once had a roommate who, when he would get drunk, he would open our window on the second story of a building and urinate out of it. And then he would move all of our furniture onto the roof of the house. So,
Oh my God.
so I would have rather have been lonely. I think it
Oh
would
my
have been
goodness.
better for my mental
Oh my
health.
God.
He
Well,
was
that
the
is not a case
bane of
scenario
my
I quite thought of.
existence. No, no, it's not a common thing. To take it to a slightly more dignified and more sensible place, more relevant to what we're talking about. With
I
everything
don't know,
that's
but
been,
Jamila, for all the people out there who have roommates who might open the window and
yeah,
urinate and
urinate
move all the
out of it.
furniture to the top, this is an important moment for them.
I agree. I'm so glad if I can make you feel heard and seen out there. But with everything that's been going on recently within the AAPI community, all of the xenophobia specifically that Asian Americans have had to face, what do you think about the impact on the mental health of that community, and how can we all support ourselves and one another?
This has been so heartbreaking to watch, Jamila, to see the rise in violence and hateful speech against Asians and Asian Americans in the United States during this COVID pandemic. The truth is, like, in the Asian American community, and I know I'm painting the community broadly with one brush, it's not monolithic.
Mm-hmm.
But what is true in many of our cultures in Asian American diaspora is that mental health is not talked about often, that it's looked at as a taboo subject. It's seen as a source of weakness if you struggle with your mental health. And that was happening before the pandemic, right? But you, on top of that, now you layer on top of that these the hateful speech and the attacks that many Asian Americans have endured. And what those attacks do is those are a form of bullying. And what that bullying does is it makes people feel like they don't belong. It makes them feel like they're outsiders. It tells them, hey, you're not a part of our community. You're an outsider. And that actually can be alienating, isolating, and can in fact contribute to a sense of loneliness at a time, mind you, of great stress when we're all going through a very difficult pandemic. So the Asian American community was already struggling with high rates of depression and anxiety. And I worry that this has contributed to it further, especially for young people who in school are enduring many of these taunts and attacks in the playground and in the cafeteria. School as it is, especially middle school, not easy for anyone. I
No.
can really speak to that myself.
Mm-hmm.
But to have to deal with all of this in the midst of a pandemic, it's just extraordinarily hard for kids. So I do worry about the impact it has on all of us. But at the same time, I think that there are opportunities for us, especially in the face of those attacks, to reach out and to remind people that they do in fact belong, that they do matter, that they are seen and valued. And the thing is, the way that you do that can be disarmingly simple. When you stop somebody and ask them how they're doing and actually pause to listen, which doesn't happen very often. What you're saying to them is, I see you, you matter. When you help somebody with something simple, whether it's picking up, papers that they may have dropped, or helping them, with a task that may be difficult, it may take you a minute or two, but you're once again saying to them, I see you, you matter. If you're a student who's listening to this, and you're in grade school or you're in college, and you see somebody sitting alone in the cafeteria, and you take a moment and actually pause to check on them and sit next to them, that is extraordinarily validating. I say this as a child in elementary school who spent many lunch sessions sitting by himself and feeling quite lonely.
You and me both.
Yeah.
That's something we bonded over on my podcast.
We did. Yeah. And the thing is, like, it, now that may not seem like a big deal for us to have lunch alone, but in those moments, those are painful, right? And those stick with you. That's why all these years later, you and I still remember those, like, so clearly.
Still harping on about it. All the success we've had, still keep going on about the cafeteria.
Why didn't Eric sit next to me in sixth grade at lunch? No, but the truth is that it is the small gestures, not the grand acts, that make people feel like they belong. And that is what we all have an opportunity to do for the people around us right now. And look, you might think that, you're the only one struggling, or it might look on the outside that somebody else is not struggling. But one thing I will tell you for sure is that almost everyone I have met in their own quiet way is struggling with some element of this pandemic. Maybe it's struggling with work, maybe it's not being with family, maybe it's worrying about the health, of their parents or their children. And so that moment that you take to check on someone, the 2-minute call you make to them, the text message you send them to say, hey, I'm thinking about you and just want you to know, I would love to catch up with you and see how you are. Those moments, those are moments of visibility, as I call them, in a world where so many of us walk around feeling invisible and like we don't matter. Those are the moments where we tell people, I see you, you matter, and you have worth.
That's really beautifully said. And I think that's really, really important. And, I felt tremendous empathy towards the Asian community, watching what happened to them. And, we're not going to get into the politics of it, but people as high up as possible within the United States government saying things that were inflammatory towards that community and towards Americans around that community. And so it became a very stressful time that reminded me, and I don't know if you felt this way, but post 9/11, to be visibly South Asian became a very alienating experience for people that look like you and me. And that also extended to the United Kingdom with the 7/7 bombings. But how did that time make you feel? Were you on the receiving end of any kind of bigotry when that happened?
Well, it's interesting. I certainly felt it after 9/11. I remember very distinctly walking onto planes and seeing people clutch their purses and shrink away from the aisle, as I was coming through. I remember being constantly pulled out of the security line for quote unquote random checks, despite the fact that nobody else seemed to be. I remember that feeling, just being stared at walking through airports, as people would look at my bags and wonder if I had something, destructive or harmful in my bag that I was bringing onto a plane. As somebody who had been brought up here in the United States, that was one of those times where I felt like an outsider, even though this was my home. And when all of this happened around COVID, when Asian Americans were feeling alienated and attacked, really, during this pandemic, I personally didn't feel it directly because I'm of the Asian variety that's brown-skinned, right? And the people who are primarily targeted with those with East Asian or Southeast Asian features. But my wife is Chinese American. My kids have East Asian features. And I worried that when they went out, that people would look at them and somehow, unfairly ascribe blame to them. And that worried me, and made me not want them to go out, and made me worry for their safety. My in-laws, my mother and father-in-law, my sister-in-law, are also Chinese American, and I worried about their safety as well. And this is not the kind of America that I believe we truly are, that we should be. When my family came to this country, like so many other immigrants, they came not assuming that America was a perfect country, but hoping that this would be a place where their children could be looked at and supported because of their desire to work hard and their ideas, and not discriminated against because of the color of their skin or the fact that they had a funny sounding name, or because they were from the wrong caste, as we often were in India. But over the course of our time in America, we have been so blessed. We have had so many opportunities. We've had teachers in public schools who looked out for me and my sister. We've had opportunities to get a good education. I've had the opportunity to be asked by the president to serve and look out for the health of the entire nation, even despite the fact that I'm the grandson of a poor farmer.
Little mic drop there, Vivek.
From rural India, but look, these are the blessings, right, of America. But there's also the hard work of preserving America is looking in the mirror and recognizing when we fall short. Mm-hmm. And these moments where we turn against each other, when we allow people who are in leadership positions to turn us against each other, those are the moments where we fall short of those ideals. And I think we can do better. I think we must do better. But I think it starts with each of us, choosing to put aside hateful rhetoric, and names matter, by the way. The words we use to describe COVID-19 matter. They can ascribe blame to a certain group of people. So we can't cast them off as just someone's preference of how they use things. We've got to recognize the impact our speech and our actions have on the well-being of other people. And I believe that those of us who are blessed with the opportunity to serve the public in leadership positions are triply responsible for making sure that our words and actions don't contribute to harm, but only contribute to healing and to unity.
100%. One other thing I wanted to bring up is that, and I'm not trying to generalize here, but I think it's fair to say that from whatever part of Asia you're from, traditionally, we are not encouraged to seek out support for our mental health. Things like therapy, especially almost when we're over here. Perhaps it's the same, I suppose, when we're back home. But the concept of the quote unquote model minority. We're supposed to be here just to work hard, to be perfect citizens, to blend in, to not stand out unless it's because we are being exceptional, and we are to not show the weakness, and it's some sort of it's deemed some sort of shame of our family, and our parents, that they didn't do a good enough job, as if mental health were that simple, as if it was so black and white. And so I would love to have someone in such a position of power who is a South Asian be able to talk about the things that you encourage young people to do if they are struggling with their mental health, in particular those within the AAPI community.
And Jameela, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that is, I think, a burden that many of us do carry in the API community, right? We have a culture that tells us that a mental health struggle is evidence that you're broken or deficient in some way. I remember growing up, we had family members who, in quiet whispers, people would admit that they had mental health concerns. We had an uncle actually who sadly took his own life after a long struggle with depression. But people wouldn't really talk about it, and they would say, "Gosh, if people find out that somebody struggling with mental illness in our family, then no one will ever want to marry our kids. They won't want to marry into our family." These are the kind of stories and narratives that we're driving, people to hide what they were struggling with. But I think with the benefit of time and experience, I think one thing we can say very clearly is that if you are struggling with your mental health, that you're not alone and you are not broken in any way. You're a human being having a human experience. Everybody struggles at some point. Maybe they get classified as clinically as having depression. Maybe they don't. Maybe they get classified as having an anxiety disorder. Maybe they don't. But we all have symptoms of anxiety and depression at various points in our life. We all struggle. And I think what we need to do is, number one, we need to speak more openly about those struggles so that we can not only be open and honest, and it feels good to be honest, but we can also give others around us permission to speak up as well. The second thing I think that we need to do is recognizing that so many people do struggle, is I think we need to approach others with a little bit more humility and understanding. And that's a struggle for me too. I'm working hard to do that myself. But, sometimes when someone is short with me, I try to pause and say, well, maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe their relative is sick with COVID and they're worried. Maybe something else has happened in their life and they're struggling with depression or anxiety. Maybe they're lonely. Many things are happening in people's lives that we don't know. And sometimes pausing before we judge can be powerful, can give that person a moment to also pause, and to take stock of where they are. But lastly, just remember this: if you need help, seeking out help, whether that's from a friend or whether that's from a mental health professional, whether that's getting therapy, or in certain cases, if medication is needed, that again does not mean that you are broken in any way. Plenty of people have been helped by therapy. And therapy, we all get therapy in different ways. That's the interesting thing, right? Some of us get it from our friends and our family. Some of us get it from people who have a medical degree. We may get it from different places, but we all get it in some form, way, shape, or form. And so my hope is that we will get to a point where we can look at our mental health not that differently than we look at our physical health, as an area that's important, one where we should be focused, one where we should not only ensure that we can speak openly and get treatment, but where we can actually focus on prevention as well, something we frankly don't do with physical health all that well. But mental health, when it comes to prevention of mental illness, what that looks like is actually building strong social connections in our communities, having ways that we can reduce stress in our lives, thinking about how to build our life around what really matters to us, what brings us happiness and joy, so that we are chasing our dreams and not someone else's dreams and values. Those are the preventive measures, as I think of it, that we can take to ensure that we are mentally healthy and strong and resilient.
100%. And for anyone who hasn't heard me bang on about this on my podcast every single week, I always think it's important as a public figure who is South Asian within this current generation that I used to have the misunderstanding that admitting that I was struggling with my mental health and needing medication and needing therapy would mean I was broken. And it's only now that I've had medication and therapy that I realized that the only time I was ever broken was before I sought help. And so please, please, please do not carry any kind of stigma or embarrassment around anything that, I mean, it's exactly the same as when I have a sore throat, I go to the doctor and I have a pill for that. And I look at it very much so in the same way. It's still a part of your body. Your brain is still a functioning organ within your body, and you have to care for it the same way you would all of your other organs. And you have to take note of it, and you have to make sure that you are inquiring about it constantly and seeking out the best possible care to maintain it for a long and happy, healthy life. And that's something I feel very passionately about. So
Jameela, I gotta say, I so appreciate how you've spoken openly about your own mental health. I think it's so important for people to do that. So I just want to applaud that. I think the more people who do that, I think the more we'll be able to normalize really concerns with mental health and treat them, as you said, just like a sore throat or anything else. But I'm curious also, like, when you think about your own mental health and well-being, like, what helps you? Like, what helps you feel better when you're struggling? What do you do to sort of keep yourself in a good place?
Well, I like meds occasionally, not all of the time, because some of them in America can be quite addictive. So I'm very careful around that. But I also really enjoy being cuddled. Dr. Vivek Murthy from the Surgeon General of the United States. It feels ridiculous to say that in a serious interview, but I really crave physical affection. So it can slow down my heart rate, and it makes me feel safe. Getting away from my phone, getting away from the news cycle, getting away from all technology and getting into nature is hugely therapeutic for me. And also exercise. This is something that I've been talking about a lot publicly lately, that exercise since the 80s has become something that we associate only with physical vanity, because again, capitalism has taken over something that was just a basic human right. And a lot of people now don't exercise because they look at it as a means to a physical end, rather than an instantly gratifying emotional and mental health benefit. And so during the pandemic was the first time I'd ever had time for myself. And I would go walking every single day with my friend, and doing so completely changed how often I needed medication, how stressed I was, how I was sleeping every night. Sleep is such a huge part of your mental and physical health. And so exercise is another one. And I wish that we could get, America and the world moving again, and not in pursuit of looking good in a crop top and leggings, or having the perfect 8-pack. I really think it's important that we continue to highlight the importance of exercise for mental health. What about you? What makes you feel better?
Well, first, I just love that list that you just shared. I mean, that's just such a great guide to the many ways there are to actually improve your mental well-being. For me, it's actually some similar elements. I found that physical
Cuddling? Is it
activity.
cuddling?
Well, physical affection is important, and I respond also to physical affection. Look, as human beings, like that's part of who we are. That's like we respond to touch, we respond to affection in many ways, and so physical touch is important. But also, like I noticed, physical activity a few years ago has a real, like even beyond, like you said, like impacting your weight, your cardiovascular health. It has an instant effect on your mood very often, and so I found that like when I'm in a bad mood or I'm not dealing with stress very well, sometimes my wife Alice will notice it and she'll say, you need to go work out. You need to go do something active so you can just lift your mood and get out of your darker place. And so I find that to be very helpful. I also have a list of videos that sort of save short videos. Sometimes of them are inspiring speeches. Some of them are other sort of inspiring sort of sequences, but they just kind of remind me of that feeling of inspiration, that I love to feel, and that music so often can bring, and to me, like inspiring ideas can bring as well. And so I just have a variety of tools that I try to keep handy to lift me out of my moods. But one of the most challenging pieces of it, Jameela, has been recognizing when I'm starting to tumble in terms of my mood before I get too far downhill, so to speak. Because sometimes I can just tumble down and down and down, spend an entire day just getting worse and worse and worse. And and then before I know it, I'm kind of in a bad place. And so I'm trying to get better at just recognizing earlier when I'm getting short-tempered, for example, in a conversation, or when I'm feeling more and more impatient, because that's a sign for me that my mood is starting to go downhill. And I'm trying to stop, take a break, either go for a walk at that time or listening to something inspiring or call somebody that I love and care about, or walk into the next room and, chat with my mom or play with my child or hang out with my wife, Alice. So these are the things that I'm trying to pay more attention to, but it's a process because I'm also, like so many people, I've been brought up, right, in a culture in modern society, which sort of tells me that, that's being soft, to pay attention to those things. You just got to keep grinding, keep moving ahead, keep working hard, just put your head down and work 18 hours, sacrifice sleep. You can sleep when you die, just keep working. And I mean, these are the things that we used to say, even in residency, like when I was in medical residency and we'd work sometimes 36 hours in a row and longer, but we would take that as a point of pride. And now I'm like, there was really no pride in staying up all night long and depriving yourself of rest, because then it shows up in your mood the next day.
It's also not ideal for the patient. It's not ideal. Like if I could choose how much sleep my surgeon or my doctor has had before they treat me, I would want more than zero for sure. Yeah. Before we go, is there any lasting thing you would like to say, in particular to the young AAPI children or kids or teenagers or young people out there who may be listening to this conversation who haven't thought about these things before? Maybe they've been so lost in the chaos that they haven't even thought to check in with themselves. Is there anything you would like to say to them before we go?
Well, Jameela, the thing that's on my mind these days so often, especially when I talk to folks who are younger, is this question about self-worth and where our self-worth comes from. And what concerns me so often is I meet so many people, college students, high school students, people who are older as well, who feel like their worth is tied to external things, to how popular they are, or what kind of fancy job they may get, or if they land an amazing internship, or if they are at the top of their class. And while all of those things have a place, what I want everyone who may be listening to this to know is that your worth as a human being is intrinsic. You were born fundamentally with the ability to give and receive love. And that is what makes you a gift to the world. That love that you get from other people can lift you up. It can renew you. It can refresh you. It can remind you of who you fundamentally are. That is the power of what love can do. And you can return that to others, as all of us have undoubtedly done at various points in our life. But whether our love manifests as kindness or generosity, or just genuine affection toward another, whether it's platonic or romantic, that love is one of our greatest gifts, and all of us have it. And if you have nothing else, if you have no other degrees, no other fancy titles, no bank accounts that are bursting with funds, none of that matters when it ultimately comes to your worth as a human being. And I want people to always remember that. I want my kids to remember that. I want to remember it for myself too, because when we walk around the world, when we move through society knowing that we have worth, we can do extraordinary things. Nothing can make us feel small. It is when our worth is called into question, when we feel like we don't matter, or we're unseen, or we're invisible. That's when we start to falter. That's when everything seems heavier and harder and more difficult. So that's the one thing I want to leave young people with, is know your worth. Know that your worth is intrinsic. Know that the definition of strength is not the person who's the loudest in the room, or who has like the biggest muscles, or who can bully other people around. Strength is defined by having the courage to give and receive love, the courage to be vulnerable, the courage to be open, honest, and authentic. And you don't need any amount of training. You don't need any popularity. You don't need any fancy degrees to be able to do that. You just need the courage to stand up and be yourself and to recognize your self-worth.
Man, I hope you run for president one day. Bloody hell, that was a great answer. You're always such a pleasure to talk to. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving me this time and all of us this time, because you're the busiest person in the world. But I will let you get back to your family and to saving America. And thank you so much, Dr. Vivek Murthy.
Well, Jameela, what a joy to be with you. I enjoyed it so much the first time, and I think I've enjoyed it even more the second time. But thank you for being a voice and a champion for people out there on mental health issues and so much else. And I hope to talk to you again before not too long.
Anytime.
Take care.
Great. Then. Thank you so much.